The summer of 1945 crept over Okinawa almost unnoticed, the humid air thick with the smell of ashes and fear. In the ruined village of Maeda, shadows moved between crumbling walls and scorched palm trees, dozens of children who had been left alone by the war. They didn't know each other's names, only scraps of their own pasts. One was called the boy with the bandage, another the girl in the blue kimono. What united them was loneliness, the pain of losing everything, and a gnawing hunger that never truly faded. Fumiko, the eldest at 12, became the caretaker for the others, rationing out their last handfuls of millet gathered from the dirt. Every morning, the children set out to scavenge for food. They sorted through the rubble for any grains, picked over burned rice sacks, chased lizards, or gnawed on tree bark when nothing else could be found. Water was a rare treasure. It was collected from puddles and cracks by Tsubasa, the youngest, whose back was still healing from a fall into a shell crater. When, by some miracle, they stole a few raw sweet potatoes from a distant farm, that day became a small celebration. Fear was woven into every part of their lives. The children never approached the road, knowing it brought gunfire or the threat of mines. At night, they huddled together in the basement of a half-collapsed house, trying to sleep through the rumble of distant artillery and the uncertain steps of American patrols. Older children whispered stories about parents, some taken by the war and never seen again, others killed in bombings, and some spirited away by soldiers. Death was no longer surprising or terrifying. It simply was. When American forces approached Maeda, the children retreated deeper into hiding. They had been taught that foreigners were merciless and would kill or harm them if discovered. Each day, as patrols passed by, the children clung to their shelter, neither seeking help nor making themselves known. They became like ghosts, hungry, frightened, invisible to the world outside. Fumiko took it upon herself to create some sense of order among the chaos. She divided tasks and made sure everyone stayed together. She taught the smallest ones how to hide, when to stay silent, and where to find the safest places in the ruins. Despite her age, she carried the weight of responsibility with a seriousness that belonged to someone much older. The other children followed her without question, sensing that her leadership was the thin line between survival and disaster. Food and water became both obsession and torment. Every day ended with aching stomachs, the taste of dirt and bitterness in their mouths. Fumiko watched as the smallest children grew weaker, their legs trembling when they tried to stand. Sometimes all they could do was sit quietly and wait for daylight, hoping that tomorrow might bring something to eat. Despite the constant threat of discovery, there were moments when a strange peace settled over their small group. In the deep blue twilight, Fumiko would hum an old lullaby, barely loud enough for the others to hear. The song brought memories of mothers and fathers, of laughter in a time before the world broke apart. For a few minutes, the fear and hunger seemed to fade, replaced by a fragile sense of belonging. The village around them was both prison and refuge. Its broken streets and gutted homes shielded the children from the eyes of soldiers and strangers alike. But it also trapped them in a world without hope, a world where each day was measured by what could be found and what could be kept. Through it all, Fumiko clung to the belief that they could survive, even as the world grew colder and more dangerous with each passing night. Maeda was more than just a shattered village. It was a labyrinth of hidden dangers, where every step could mean disaster. The fields and narrow paths around the ruins were sown with landmines, laid by both retreating Japanese forces and advancing Americans to block enemy movement. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, a distant explosion would shake the ground, a grim reminder that even the earth itself had become an enemy. The children learned the boundaries by heart, memorizing which patches of grass were safe and which held death just beneath the surface. Fumiko, ever vigilant, took on the role of protector. She traced out safe routes, guiding the younger children step by step, always making them walk in her exact footprints. 2 boys had already vanished after wandering off the path, and the memory haunted her every time they ventured outside for food or water. Survival depended on obedience, discipline, and silence. She repeated these rules until the youngest could recite them like a prayer. Daytime brought a fragile calm to Maeda, but the sense of menace never faded. The children stayed low and moved slowly, careful not to disturb any rubble or hidden wires. Sometimes, through cracks in the walls or from beneath piles of debris, they would spy American patrols in the distance, soldiers with cautious eyes and heavy boots, searching for threats, not children. On rare occasions, a soldier would toss a tin of food or a candy wrapper into the grass, but the children rarely dared to retrieve it, afraid of what might be hidden below. Silence became their shield. Laughter, crying, even loud footsteps could attract attention. The sound of a single stone falling could send them scrambling for cover. At night, the children retreated to their basement shelter, pressing close together for warmth and reassurance. The smallest ones sometimes whimpered in their sleep, but Fumiko would gently hush them, her hand resting on their shoulders until the fear passed. Isolation grew heavier with each day. The village felt like a graveyard, where the only signs of life were the desperate, hushed movements of children. They saw no adults, heard no voices except their own. Even the crows that scavenged in the ruins seemed wary and silent. The children learned to move as ghosts, blending into the broken landscape and leaving as little trace as possible. Water remained a constant worry. With so many wells destroyed or contaminated, they had to rely on puddles after rain or muddy trickles collected in battered cups. Sometimes Fumiko would risk crossing a dangerous stretch to find a cleaner source, but she always returned with pounding heart, grateful simply to have made it back alive. Every sip felt stolen from fate. Hunger became their only companion that did not betray them. It gnawed at their insides, clouded their minds, made every other hardship seem secondary. The children shared everything: an apple core, a handful of roots, a scrap of dried fish. Sometimes, when one of the younger boys found a beetle or a piece of bark, they would pretend it was a treat from another world. In this place, even make-believe could keep despair at bay. At dusk, the silence thickened. The ruins glowed faintly in the dying light, casting long shadows that merged with the memory of those who had once lived there. The children felt themselves becoming part of the silence, as if the world had forgotten them. But even as hope faded, Fumiko refused to give in to fear. She watched the stars through broken beams and whispered to herself that one day, somehow, the silence would be broken. Lieutenant John McAllister spent his days overseeing mine-clearing operations on the outskirts of Maeda. His team worked with methodical caution, scanning the scarred earth for buried dangers. In recent weeks, he began noticing small signs: tiny footprints in the dust, a discarded piece of cloth, the faint echo of children's voices drifting from the ruins. These traces convinced him that survivors, most likely children, were hiding somewhere within the village. He felt a growing responsibility to help them, but knew that a wrong move could drive them deeper into hiding or even toward disaster. Rather than alerting the higher command, McAllister quietly confided in Sergeant Martino, a former schoolteacher from New York. Martino understood the unspoken language of frightened children and suggested patience and gentleness instead of force. They decided to try an experiment: leave food and a message near a well-known landmark and see what happened. Martino wrote a short note in simple Japanese. "We want to help. There is no danger here." That night, under the dim glow of a lantern, they left bread, canned meat, apples, and the note beside the ruins of the old well. The next morning, Fumiko spotted the offering. She watched the well from a hidden corner for hours, expecting a trap or soldiers waiting in ambush. Only when the coast seemed clear did she crawl over and inspect the items. The message made her wary, but hunger won out. She took the food and hurried back to the shelter, distributing it carefully among the others. The children ate in silence, each bite a mix of relief and suspicion. For the first time in days, no one went to bed hungry. The Americans noticed that the food had disappeared, and over the following days they left more supplies, this time including small items like socks, a few sweets, and another note. Each time, the children retrieved the packages after long surveillance, but never dared to show themselves. McAllister felt both hope and frustration growing. He understood the children's fear, but he also knew that time was running out. Every day brought new dangers, shifting front lines, unexploded ordnance, and disease. Fumiko studied the notes, sensing that the people leaving these gifts meant well. Still, she was cautious, teaching the younger children to stay hidden and never to approach strangers. Some of the boys wanted to sneak out and thank the mysterious benefactors, but Fumiko forbade it, haunted by stories of betrayal and violence. Safety, she reminded them, came before curiosity. Despite her vigilance, something changed in the group. The steady appearance of food and simple gifts began to restore a faint sense of trust. The children started to talk quietly about the possibility that someone outside their small world cared if they lived or died. At night, instead of only telling stories about the past, Fumiko found herself imagining a future, however uncertain. McAllister, meanwhile, struggled with how to reach the children more directly. He worried that a sudden approach could backfire, but doing nothing seemed equally cruel. He and Martino debated late into the evening, searching for a way to show that their intentions were genuine. Their only certainty was that they could not give up, not when lives hung in the balance. The village remained silent, a world between hope and fear. The Americans watched from a distance, determined to break through the wall of mistrust, while the children waited, torn between suspicion and longing. In those uneasy days, the first fragile threads of contact were being spun, threads that might one day pull both sides towards something like salvation. In mid-July, dark clouds pressed low over Maeda, promising rain but bringing only a heavy, suffocating heat. The minefield between the American outpost and the children's ruined shelter seemed especially menacing now, the ground damp and treacherous. That morning, McAllister received word from a local villager that faint children's voices had been heard near one of the basement ruins. It was a sign the Americans could no longer ignore. They decided it was time to make direct contact, even if it meant putting themselves at great risk. McAllister called for volunteers, and 5 men stepped forward without hesitation. Among them were Sergeant Martino, the soft-spoken former teacher, radio operator Elliot, and Kimura, the unit's Japanese-American interpreter. Together, they prepared to cross the minefield carrying only what was necessary: food, water, medical supplies, and white cloths for signaling peace. Every man knew that a single misstep could mean disaster, but the urgency of saving the children outweighed their fears. They moved out in a slow, deliberate line, testing the ground with metal detectors and long poles, marking each safe step with colored flags. The process was painstaking. Sweat trickled down their faces as they focused on the smallest details: the shape of a patch of earth, the way grass bent underfoot. Now and then, the muffled clink of metal beneath the soil made hearts race. At one point, Elliot's foot brushed against something hard. The team froze as McAllister carefully checked and found an old, rusted mine. 10 tense minutes passed before they could breathe again. Finally, after nearly 2 hours, they reached the edge of the ruined house where the children hid. Inside, the children crouched in terrified silence, watching the shadows move through the cracks in the walls. Kimura spoke gently in Japanese, telling them they had come to help and brought food and medicine. He described, in a calm and steady voice, how the soldiers had crossed the dangerous field just for them, risking their own lives to make sure the children would not starve. The children's fear was overwhelming. Fumiko hesitated, her instincts urging her to protect the younger ones at all costs. But the sight of Kimura, who looked and sounded like someone from home, gave her pause. When McAllister set down his helmet, placed his hands in full view, and stepped back, he made himself as unthreatening as possible. Fumiko slowly rose from her hiding place, her heart pounding in her chest. She stepped forward into the open, her bare feet raw and her clothes in tatters. Behind her, the other children hesitantly emerged, clinging to each other in confusion and hope. The Americans didn't rush them. Instead, Martino knelt down and gently handed Fumiko a canteen and a loaf of bread, while Elliot smiled, offering a small wrapped sweet to the youngest. For a long, suspended moment, the children stared in disbelief, unable to process the kindness shown to them. After the first uncertain contact, the Americans provided food and water to every child, checking them for wounds and signs of illness. Kimura spoke softly, translating questions and reassurances, building a bridge of trust word by word. Some of the younger children began to cry, but these were tears of relief, not terror. The oldest boys watched warily, still expecting a trick, but hunger slowly won out over suspicion. The soldiers knew they could not stay in the ruined house. The danger of mines and further combat was too great. McAllister explained that they would lead the children back through the cleared path, but it would require absolute trust and careful discipline. He told Fumiko she must help keep everyone in line, stepping only where the flags marked safety. The children nodded, silently forming a chain behind their protectors. As the small procession began its slow, careful journey back through the minefield, each child holding tight to the hand of a soldier or another child, the weight of fear gave way to something different. The Americans moved with infinite patience, guiding each step, murmuring encouragement in whatever language seemed to comfort. Even the air felt lighter as the group inched forward, every life hanging on the thin hope that they could all make it through, together. Leading the children through the minefield became an operation that demanded both courage and unwavering discipline. McAllister took the front, holding a metal detector in one hand and a long, slender pole in the other. Each movement was slow, deliberate, and careful, with every safe step marked by a small, colored flag. The children followed single file, clinging tightly to one another or to the steady hands of the soldiers. The atmosphere was tense, but Fumiko tried to keep her voice calm, quietly repeating instructions to the youngest to step exactly where she did. The rain began as a gentle drizzle, making the ground slick and the air even heavier. The soldiers worried that water might shift the soil or reveal hidden dangers, but they pressed on, never letting their guard drop. At one point, a muffled explosion sounded off to the side. A cow had wandered onto a forgotten mine. The children froze, eyes wide with terror, but Martino reassured them, gently urging the group forward and reminding them to focus on the path. The procession moved slowly, taking nearly 2 hours to cross the field that separated ruin from relative safety. The smallest children were carried by the soldiers, who spoke to them in soft voices, sometimes even humming tunes to distract from the fear. Fumiko felt her heart pounding in her chest, but forced herself to appear strong for the others. With every step that took them closer to the American camp, she felt the oppressive weight of uncertainty begin to lift, replaced by a fragile, trembling hope. When they finally reached the cleared edge of the minefield, relief was almost overwhelming. The Americans led the group to a tented area where warm blankets and clean water awaited them. Medical staff immediately began tending to wounds, some minor, some dangerously infected. The children, weak from days of malnutrition, were given broth, soft bread, and slices of fruit. For many, it was their first real meal in weeks, and the food seemed almost miraculous. The soldiers and medical workers treated the children with patience and kindness, never rushing or scolding. They washed dirt from scraped knees, combed tangles from hair, and gave out dry clothes found in supply crates. Martino took extra care with the smallest, telling them gentle stories or showing them how to tie their shoes. The simple routines of care and comfort brought a sense of normalcy that the children had long forgotten. Over the next few days, the children began to recover. Energy slowly returned, especially to the youngest, who ventured shyly from their beds to explore the new camp. Laughter, tentative at first, gradually filled the spaces between the tents. Fumiko watched in amazement as some of the boys learned English words from the soldiers, trading smiles and bits of candy. For the first time in months, the children slept soundly, no longer haunted by the fear of discovery. As trust grew, the Americans introduced the children to simple games and songs. Kimura translated instructions, and soon the camp was alive with clapping, singing, and playful shouts. Even the older children found themselves drawn into the activities, hesitantly at first, then with genuine delight. Fumiko allowed herself to hope that, maybe, their lives could once again hold moments of happiness. The bond between rescuers and rescued deepened with each passing day. Soldiers wrote letters home describing the children they had come to care for, while some of the children drew pictures for their new friends. It was a fragile peace, but it was real. In the safety of the camp, surrounded by kindness and laughter, the children began to rediscover their sense of belonging and the possibility of a future beyond war. The days following the rescue marked the beginning of a slow transformation in the camp. With each sunrise, the children grew stronger and more curious. The Americans, once seen as distant and frightening, became familiar faces, teachers, protectors, and friends. Soldiers and nurses organized simple lessons, teaching the children how to read and write basic words in both Japanese and English. Every accomplishment, no matter how small, was met with encouragement and gentle applause. Volunteers worked together to create a routine that restored some sense of childhood. There were new clothes, books, and even toys gathered from military donations and local villagers. Simple games filled the afternoons, from hopscotch scratched into the dirt to makeshift baseball matches played with sticks and old helmets. Laughter, hesitant at first, grew stronger and more frequent, echoing through the rows of tents. Even the most reserved children began to let go of fear and join in. Photographers arrived to document the story, capturing moments of hope amid the hardship. Images of Fumiko helping a soldier distribute bread or Tsubasa sitting on Martino's lap made their way into American newspapers, stirring unexpected compassion among readers far from the war. These photos, more than words, told a story of risk and humanity that transcended national boundaries. Soon, arrangements were made to transfer the orphans to a larger care facility run by the Red Cross in Nago. The children greeted the news with a mixture of excitement and anxiety, unsure of what awaited them, but trusting the Americans who had saved them. McAllister, Martino, and Kimura promised to visit whenever possible, and on the day of departure there were hugs, tears, and gifts exchanged, drawings, letters, and the smallest tokens of gratitude. In the months that followed, the rescued children slowly adapted to their new lives. They attended school regularly, made friends from other villages, and began to heal from the invisible wounds of war. Fumiko, who had once carried the weight of responsibility for so many, flourished as a natural leader. She became a guiding force for the younger orphans, always encouraging them to believe in better days. The story of the rescue spread throughout Okinawa and beyond. Some people speculated that the Americans had acted for publicity, but those who were there knew the truth was deeper. Each soldier who braved the minefield had done so not for recognition, but because compassion demanded it. The legacy of their actions lingered not just in memory, but in the lives they helped restore. Years passed, and the children grew into adults, carrying with them the lessons of hardship and kindness. Some returned to Maeda, laying flowers near the site of the old minefield and remembering the day their lives changed. Others shared their stories with their own children, passing down memories of courage and mercy. In the gentle dawn light, laughter once again drifted over the fields, proof that hope, once planted, could bloom even after the storm.